Hey there, folks. Welcome to another episode of Rise Like Lions. I am Kevin, and it's just me today because this is an episode that we're pulling together on kind of short notice. And what this is an addendum to a series that we've been doing on the upcoming Canadian federal election. It is coming up September 20th on Monday, and we're doing this on Wednesday, so this is a bit tight timing. But the reason why I felt we needed to do an addendum-ish or episode is because there's one party that we didn't get to cover. We didn't get to cover a few parties just due to time constraints. And so we covered the Conservatives, Liberals, NDP, and Green Party. We did platform breakdowns. But there's one party that has been, I think, I would say distressingly gaining in support across the country, which is the People's Party of Canada. And I do think it's important to do a platform breakdown for the People's Party of Canada, because I have to be real in that I think a lot of people who are supporting the People's Party of Canada actually don't really know what is in their platform, don't know what it entails. And so I think it's important that I do this breakdown, and maybe it will be of value. If you know someone who is a People's Party of Canada supporter, maybe you can send this to them and they can get educated on the platform, or just for People's Party of Canada supporters who tend to see this video through whatever means. Hopefully you will find out a little bit more about what your party actually stands for. So what I'm going to do, folks, is I did a presentation. This was actually back in 2019. I started this presentation, and it's when Maxime Bernier was doing a series of tours across the country, and he was speaking about the People's Party platform. You know, when I'm not a podcaster, I am a social science professor at a community college in Ontario. And Maxime Bernier was making a stop at our college. And so what the faculty members there did is they put together a presentation, basically an event, to talk about the very distressing things we thought were a part of the platform of the People's Party of Canada. And so this presentation was started in 2019. It's been updated, though, to include the latest from the People's Party of Canada. And so the title is just, which people does the PPC represent? So, you know, I've got the PPC logo there. It says strong and free, and I would argue misleading. So let's just jump into the presentation and see what it is, in fact, the People's Party of Canada are all about. We'll start out with their leader, which I think is important because Maxime Bernier is the public face. Bernier founded the party in 2018 after he resigned from the Conservative Party of Canada. And this is after he had a leadership race with Andrew Scheer to find out who would lead the party. And so Bernier lost, and mostly because Bernier wanted to take the party even further right than the Conservatives already were. And this was seen as an issue by the Conservatives because they felt that it was moving further away from any kind of broad-based, sentiment among the Canadian populace. Bernier wanted to go a lot further right. So that's an important thing to know off the bat. But let's get into some of their policies now. And these are, folks, I have read the People's Party of Canada platform. I read it in detail in 2019. I've read it in detail in 2021. There's been minor tweaks to their platform between 2019 and the present, but just minor. So I'm going to go through what the policies are. So first of all, let's look at their economic policies. Well, it's pretty clear that the policies of the People's Party of Canada are economics for the 1%. And this should be the first thing that I hope would make people think that maybe this idea that the People's Party is for the people, broadly construed, that this is highly misleading, because that's not what their policies talk about. So what do they talk about? Well, they talk about tax cuts for the rich, and I'll get into precisely how they lay these out. They talk about cutting corporate taxes from 15% to 10%. And if you recall, pretty much every other party we looked at, except for the Conservatives, have talked about increasing the corporate taxes. Even the Liberals under Justin Trudeau did a small increase to the corporate tax rate. PPC is going full speed the other direction. Lower corporate taxes. They also want to gut all forms of government spending. And so they talk about not bailing out any key sector of the economy that gets into trouble, such as the automotive industry did back in 2018, 2019. No subsidies for Canadian farmers, no development grants for northern communities or poor rural communities. They want to gut funding to the CBC, to our national broadcaster. And they talk in their platform in 2021 about a commitment to aggressively cut government spending across the board. So this is sort of their approach. And, they had a breakdown of what specifically they wanted to do around taxes in their 2019 platform. They've taken this out of their 2021 platform. They don't have specifics. They do, however, say they're going to cut taxes on all these different groups. But I think what they actually had up in 2019 is very revealing. So, for instance, what they're talking about are cuts to income tax, but they're cuts to income tax that benefit the very richest people. So if you look at what they're talking about in terms of income tax, there's no tax cut for low-income earners. There's a 0.5% tax cut for middle-income earners. But when you start getting over $100,000, the tax cuts just keep getting better and better. So you get 1% if you make over $100,000, 4% tax cut if you make over $144,000. And if you make over $205,000 a year, well, then the PPC are your best friends because you're going to get an 8% tax cut. What they're also going to do is they're not going to tax capital gains at all. So this means that income gained from properties that appreciate, from stocks and bonds that appreciate, and folks, we know from previous videos as we broke this down, capital gains are generally enjoyed by the top 10% of wealth owners in the country. So we're talking about wealthy people who tend to benefit from capital gains. They're going to get 100% tax cut in relation to current tax codes. So that's what the PPC is going to do economically, okay? It is very clear. They're going to benefit the rich. They're not going to help working people, middle-class people, or poor people at all. Now, before I get into the other aspects of the platform that really read like a litany of extremely bad ideas, kind of each worse than the last, I want to be fair. We're fair in terms of all of our breakdowns. We try to be anyway. So there are exactly 2 good ideas that I saw on the People's Party of Canada platform. Let's talk about them. One is they want to eliminate interprovincial trade barriers. They talk about the fact that they want to stimulate trade within Canada. So they want to get rid of, different standards in different provinces, which make it problematic for provinces to sell products across the country. That's a great idea. Sounds fine. It will help domestic producers. It'll help build up our domestic markets. The other thing they want to do that I think is a good thing, and I think most Canadians would agree, is they want to increase veterans' pensions. Fair enough. I think that's actually really important to do. However, they also talk about wanting to go through all of the veteran services offered with a fine-tooth comb, and they say find out which ones to keep. I mean, the indication there, I would suggest, is that they're looking to cut veterans' benefits in other areas. So it almost seems like this one is a little bit of a contradictory position. But anyway, let's take them at face value. They want to increase veterans' benefits. That's fine. But now let's move on to the other aspects of the policies. So this one should be mind-blowing to people. So every other party in Canada has said that there's a housing crisis right now, based on hard data, based on the fact that people are unable to afford homes. New families trying to buy a home are priced out of major markets all across the country. People trying to rent are being priced out of rental markets all across the country. What does the People's Party of Canada want to do in response to this? You can't make this stuff up, folks. It's right in their platform. Well, they want to stop all funding for affordable housing. That makes perfect sense. Every other party is talking about, even the Conservatives are talking about expanding the stock of affordable housing. The PPC wants to stop all funding for affordable housing. So again, I want to ask you, if you're a working class person, if you're a poor person, and you're supporting the People's Party of Canada, I want you to understand what this policy means. They will make it harder for you to own a home, harder for you to rent. Okay, so that's a direct hit. Just important thing to understand. They also want to dismantle the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, the CMHC. It's a crown corporation that basically guarantees people's mortgages and helps people get mortgages. It sort of backs you up when you go to the bank to try and get a loan to own a home. Well, they want to dismantle that. So again, you're going to see this as you go through the platform. It's just free market, Wild West, take away all the protections. Anything that protects you from the whims of the very wealthy, from the whims of large corporations, the PPC will get rid of all of that, and they will leave you naked and exposed to those forces. So this is something you're going to see over and over again. But moving on, some other big things. Well, they want to gut firearm regulations. They want to make it easier across the board for people to buy guns. They want to get rid of any sort of regulation of dangerous firearms. So again, more guns for everyone, more dangerous guns, simplify the process to get them, right? What else? Well, their platform, we've talked in other platforms about the focus on First Nations issues being so important in this current moment with the recent revelation of all of the child graves at residential schools with all of the outstanding issues. And what's the People's Party of Canada's approach to First Nations? Well, they want to basically do away with the Indian Act. So they want to get rid of any sort of special status for First Nations people in Canada and basically just say, oh, well, we're just all Canadians now. Now, I see that they have made some changes to the language from 2019 to 2021, probably because some people pointed out that this is almost like a modern day Native genocide is what they're talking about. They want to eliminate First Nation status. Now, we also have to be clear too, folks, there are a lot of criticisms of the Indian Act. First Nations groups have a lot of criticisms of the Indian Act in terms of how it's constructed and the entitlements it either contains or does not contain. There are problems. However, none of them are saying, oh, just get rid of special status for Native people. I think what First Nations people are saying is honor treaties, honor land claims, give us the autonomy to run our communities effectively in the way we want to. Give us the autonomy to protect our culture and our language and our traditions. That's what First Nations groups are saying, the ones I've heard anyway. PPC just wants to say, oh, you're all Canadians now. They want to wave a magic wand, just get rid of any special entitlements. They also say they want to make it easier to break up reserve lands and sell them off. So they want to promote private property ownership. They want to destabilize the very idea that a First Nation, as a nation, owns land, treaty land. They want to break it up. They want to sell it off, right? They also are explicit that they want to help the ability of the Canadian federal government to force natural resources and infrastructure projects over the wishes of First Nations communities, over Native groups who are protesting, for instance, as what was happening in BC with the Trans Mountain Pipeline. So they want to use the power of the federal government to crush local autonomy when it comes to environmental issues. So again, you might know People's Party of Canada supporters who fancy themselves libertarians, who fancy themselves big defenders of freedom and rugged individualism. Well, this is an interesting thing to get them to think about, because this is the most authoritarian statement any party in Canada is making about First Nations issues in the environment. The PPC wants to climb into a steamroller, and they want to crush any local resistance to people trying to protect their water, their ecosystems. So important information to know. What are some other important aspects of the platform? Well, this idea that there is a homogeneous xenophobic nationalism. So what I mean by that is a nationalism that's based on a very narrow definition of what it is to be Canadian, and that is hostile to all other kinds of diversity or difference. So they want to officially repeal all government support for multiculturalism, right? So this idea that any other culture, apart from the narrowly defined vision of the People's Party of Canada, which, let's be honest, folks, let's call it what it is. It's white, it's male, it's Eurocentric, it's straight, it's militaristic, it's patriotic. I mean, all of these ideas they have, they want that to simply be Canadian identity. And anyone who has a different idea of it, no support, no funding, no protection. They want to drastically reduce immigration. And I want to be clear, it's okay to have a political debate about how many people we let in or don't let into our country. And some people on the left tend to think you can't even have that debate. I disagree quite strongly. Yes, you can. However, what the People's Party of Canada are talking about is not, having a rational discussion about immigration quotas on a yearly basis. They're talking about drastically, again, gutting immigration, cutting it over 60%. And this, again, is because of this xenophobia that you see in their party platform. They want to explicitly abandon any of Canada's international commitments towards refugees. So they want to withdraw from all of our UN agreements about, accepting refugees. They want to explicitly reduce the amount of refugees that Canada allows in. So that's another big issue. And probably one of the most shocking areas of the People's Party of Canada platform, which, you really want to file it under, I can't believe they actually have this stuff in black and white on their site, but they do, is they blatantly deny the fact of climate change. And they commit to unabashed fossil fuel expansion. So they want to do a number of horrible things here. They want to repeal Bill C-48, which bans oil tankers from ecologically sensitive coastal waters. They want to repeal C-69, which forces governments to consider the environmental impact of infrastructure and energy projects. So again, they're trying to get rid of even the most tenuous and flimsy legislation that protects the environment and that protects important watersheds from contamination by fossil fuel spills. They want to use a section of the Canadian Constitution, Section 9210, that enables the federal government to override provincial governments and force through any pipeline project. So again, if you know people, or if you are a People's Party of Canada supporter, and you fancy yourself a defender of individual freedom, a defender of liberty, if you fancy yourself a libertarian, you need to know that your party is advocating the most authoritarian use of federal government force that any party is advocating. They want the federal government to be able to go in to override a provincial government, to override a municipal government, to override communities of any stripe that oppose mega projects that are destructive to their communities, destructive to their drinking water, destructive to their environment. So that's right in the PPC platform. The PPC explicitly denies climate change. They actually call the global increase in atmospheric carbon a good thing. This is contrary to 98, I think today it's probably 99% of reputable scientists in the field of climate and ecology, meteorology. This is against all of those scientists, all of the scientific data and evidence. The fact that, as my co-host Dave said in a previous episode, if it isn't burning, it's flooding, right? If you look around our world today in extreme weather events. So the People's Party of Canada will speed us rapidly in the opposite direction. They will withdraw from all international obligations to help the climate, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They will abolish all subsidies for green technology, and they'll abolish the federal carbon tax. So basically, they will literally roll us back to the 1800s, the 1900s, in terms of just pumping out emissions. It would be absolute climate disaster if these policies were enacted. So other things that the PPC wants to do, well, this is maybe where they do style themselves as protectors of freedom. They want to restrict the definition of hate speech, which Canada has hate speech laws, and they want to make it even harder for people to be charged with hate speech offenses. They want to repeal Bill C-16. This adds gender identity and gender expression to the Canada Human Rights Act. This protects trans people from discrimination and hate crimes. This is the bill that famously Canadian psychology professor Jordan Peterson had a ridiculous emotional meltdown over, saying it was going to usher in this new era of gender fluid authoritarianism, all this ridiculous nonsense, which never transpired, folks. Sky hasn't fallen, right? The transsexual police aren't coming by forcing you to wear a dress if you're a dude. None of these ridiculous things that Peterson was worried about have happened. But anyway, the PPC wants to basically enable once more hate crimes directed against trans people. They want to enable blatant discrimination against trans people by repealing that bill. They also want to repeal motion M103, and this is a really ridiculous one. This was a motion that was passed as a non-binding motion. It led to no new legislation. It simply led the Liberal government to stand up in the House of Commons and say, you know what, we should oppose Islamophobia and any kind of systemic racism and religious discrimination. So the PPC wants to repeal that, and this is related to far-right arguments at the time that supposedly saying that we're against discrimination against Muslim people means we're for Sharia law, right? And that it's coming anytime soon. Burqas all around, folks. This was the ridiculous level of fear-mongering and catastrophizing that was occurring when M103 was passed. None of that came to pass, right? They also want to repeal Bill C-36, that enables the prosecution of hate crimes. So they basically want to wipe hate crimes off the books legally. They're not a thing anymore, folks. Not a big deal. So all of these things would empower white supremacists and racists. So again, you may know a People's Party of Canada supporter. You may be a People's Party of Canada supporter. Your party will explicitly do things that racists in our country love. They love these changes. They love the freedom it will give them to espouse hate and racist content. That's part of your party platform. On foreign policy, too, things get even worse. So they want to explicitly go all in on aligning our interests with the United States. They say, which is probably one of the most cynical things I've ever read in a political platform about foreign policy. They say, well, we're going to get away from any kind of foreign conflict. We're going to get out of any kind of foreign conflict unless we have strategic interests or objectives in that conflict. So it's kind of interesting. They're saying the quiet part out loud in terms of Canadian foreign policy, because that's how Canadian foreign policy has always operated, that we do tend to only get involved in foreign entanglements when it's directly in our interests or in the interests of our most powerful ally. The PPC just comes right out and says that, though. I mean, maybe you give them some sort of weird credit for their brutal honesty on embracing a nakedly imperialist and exploitative foreign policy. If so, kudos, PPC. They want to withdraw from any UN commitments that enforce obligations on Canada to be a good faith global actor. They want to sign as many free trade agreements as possible. So they want to dismantle the ability for poorer countries to protect their economies. They want to use the free trade steamroller, basically, to enforce unequal trade relations between countries. They also want to, and again, this shows just how mean-spirited this foreign policy is, they want to phase out all development assistance. So most countries in the world today, especially the members of the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, these are the wealthiest, most developed countries in the world. They all give foreign direct assistance. They all give aid to poorer countries, right? And folks, we have to be real that the aid industry is complicated. A lot of this aid can be bogus aid. A lot of it goes to Canadian corporations. I get it. But still, a lot of this aid is useful. It goes to international NGOs, preventing famines, helping after natural disasters. And in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, the PPC simply wants to say, no, we're going to turn that tap off. We have no obligations to anyone. Doesn't matter. So they want to completely isolate Canada and turn us literally into a stooge of the United States on the global stage. So other things that are coming up, it just kind of is, it's a parade of non-hits when it comes to the PPC platform. So they want to basically dismantle the Canada Health Act, right? They're really swinging for the fences here, which is great. So you know that healthcare system you know and love, Canadian citizens, they want to get rid of it. They want to dismantle the federal legislation that mandates public health care across the country. And they give this sort of bogus rhetoric about wanting provinces to be free to decide how to, blah, blah, blah. It's the standard language for people that want to dismantle Medicare, and they want to enable provincial privatization. And they even talk about eliminating the federal GST, talking about eliminating the set amounts of transfer payments the federal government gives to provinces in order to fund healthcare. And instead, their whole thing is, well, we'll get rid of the federal GST. We'll allow the provinces to choose to tax to the same amount. And then if they decide to use that on healthcare, well, they can use that on healthcare. So it's all this ridiculous thing of just enabling the door to open to rampant privatization, basically giving provinces, and let's be honest, folks, Alberta and Ontario, would forces in those countries, medical insurance companies, big pharmaceutical companies, would they rush headlong down the privatization path? Of course they would. PPC knows that perfectly well. They want to get rid of your public health care, folks. PPC supporters, you think I'm exaggerating? Fight me. Come at me. Tell me I'm wrong about this. Okay? So you need to know that. If you don't like public health care, vote for the PPC. On COVID-19, what are they proposing? Well, they'll end all vaccine mandates. They'll outlaw all vaccine passports. They'll cancel all federal funding for COVID-19 related programs. And folks, just before I move on, I think this is really important because I want to say, I'm pretty sure that the recent upsurge in interest in the People's Party of Canada is directly related to their stance on COVID-19, their stance on vaccine passports and vaccine mandates. And I want to say right now, I understand that vaccine passports and mandates are controversial. Again, some people on the left like to pretend that there is no infringement on civil liberties, that there is no good faith debate to be had about these things. I disagree. Vaccine passports are an infringement on civil liberties. Vaccine mandates are an infringement on civil liberties. However, what People's Party of Canada supporters need to understand is that a great majority of Canadians have decided that these trade-offs in terms of civil liberties are rational and reasonable in dealing with a pandemic. This is simply this is not something being enforced by the government. That's a joke. That's ridiculous. The majority of Canadians do feel this. Now, again, there's room for debate. And I understand that someone who is opposed to vaccine mandates and passports would feel politically homeless in Canada. I do understand that. However, if that's the sole reason why you're supporting the People's Party of Canada, I would hope you would look at those other policies and you would ask yourself, is linking your train to an opportunistic far-right party that is exploiting COVID paranoia for their own gain, if it's worth it? Is it worth it to support all of those other policies, right? I hope people would think carefully about that. The last thing I want to do in this presentation is I want to address concerns about the ties between the People's Party of Canada and the far right. Now, this is something that People's Party candidates tend to get their back up about very quickly. They tend to deny. They tend to say, oh, they're being attacked when people bring this up. So, folks, it's time for some facts in terms of, is the People's Party of Canada linked to the far right? Let's go through a bit of a timeline. So first of all, in August of 2018, right back to the very founding of the People's Party of Canada, Maxime Bernier starts making comments about extreme multiculturalism being a problem in Canada, and it leads directly to racist vandalism in Winnipeg, people destroying, a native monument. Later on in 2018, anti-Semite and white supremacist Adam Stashok is found working for the People's Party of Canada in Alberta. Wow. So not the first time you're going to see a Nazi working for the People's Party of Canada. In January of 2019, the PPC ran Laura Lynn Tyler Thompson in a Burnaby by-election, and she was unabashedly a religious fundamentalist, homophobic, anti-choice candidate. And so it gave you a bit of an indication as to what kind of people are drawn to the People's Party of Canada. In April of 2019, the head of the Vancouver Quadra Electoral District Association resigned over concerns of racism in the party. So the Electoral District Association is basically the riding association for the People's Party of Canada in that district in Vancouver. And the head of the riding association resigned because he's like, this party's full of racists. I don't want to be a part of this. April 2019, again, the head of the Kelowna Lake Country EDA resigns over concerns of racism. Again, another member of a riding association resigns because they feel that there's racists all through the parties. May of 2019, a Burlington, Ontario PPC Twitter account is suspended after tweeting that other races are not fully human, right? So again, naked white supremacy. In July of 29, the entire Electoral District Association board resigns in the Elmwood-Transcona riding in Winnipeg. So you got to think about that, folks. The entire riding association resigns due to fears of racism in the party in Winnipeg. In July of 2019, Maxime Bernier, in this photo here, poses with members of the Northern Guard, and they are a white supremacist organization in Canada. And so here Bernier is smiling with these noted white supremacists. And of course, the one guy is flashing the OK sign, accepted white supremacist sign. So that's what Bernier is up to in July of 2019. July of 2019, another PPC candidate, Cody Pant, posts to Facebook saying, "Our country could use more hate speech, more offensive comments, more microaggressions, more violation of safe spaces with words, and more critical thinking." So again, a classic far-right tactic of using a free speech argument to basically advocate for more hate. And it continues. So in September of 2019, it was discovered that original People's Party of Canada signatories were members of various white supremacist groups, including the Soldiers of Odin, Pegida Canada, and the National Alliance. So right from the get-go, right at the founding, these members of the People's Party of Canada were linked to far-right groups. September of 2019, the St. Catharines Electoral District Association CEO, so the head of the St. Catharines Electoral District Association, Sean Walker, is discovered to be the former head of the neo-Nazi National Alliance in the United States, and that he was formerly convicted of racist hate crimes. Literal Nazis heading up riding associations of the People's Party of Canada. So again, if you know someone who's a People's Party of Canada supporter, if you are a People's Party of Canada supporter, I will say, some people on the left will say every People's Party of Canada supporter is a Nazi. That's unfair. That's not true. However, is it true that the People's Party of Canada is riddled with white supremacists and Nazis? That is a fact. That is a historic, verifiable fact. You need to understand that about the party you support. You need to ask yourself why Nazis and white supremacists, far-right nationalists support your party. Again, September 2019, PPC candidate in Nova Scotia withdraws his nomination, citing racism in the party. I don't want to be associated with these people. They're a bunch of racists, right? October 2019, a PPC candidate from Saskatoon tweets racist cartoons of Jagmeet Singh. So all this stuff was just from the 2019 election, but this hasn't stopped. So it's continued to the present. In September of 2021, Shane Marshall, the riding director for PPC candidate Chelsea Hillier, it's found out that this guy runs multiple neo-Nazi social media accounts. And he's also charged with throwing gravel at Justin Trudeau at a London, Ontario campaign stop. So again, using political violence, which is something the far right does all the time, right? September 2021 again, PPC candidate Mark Emery calls for Trudeau to receive the same fate as Mussolini, who was famously shot and hung in the streets of Italy. Again, threatening political violence, which is what the far right does, which is what fascists do, right? September 2021 again, a Niagara PPC candidate posts pictures of World War II hangings that occurred in Nuremberg, Germany, hangings of Nazi officials, and threatens political opponents with the same fate, threatens media with the same fate, right? Again, threats of political violence, which is classic far-right behavior. Again, in September of 2021, far-right white supremacist organizations, including Canada First, the Canadian Nationalist Front, and the Plaid Army, they all encourage their members to vote for the People's Party of Canada. So again, If you are a People's Party of Canada supporter and you are not a Nazi, you are not a white supremacist, you are not a racist, I think there are some of you out there. Why is your party the party of choice for Nazis, white supremacists, white nationalists, far-right organizations? You have to ask yourself that. In good faith, ask yourself that. Why is that the case? Finally, PPC members across the country have recently been linked to widespread anti-vaccine protests. And again, folks, I believe in civil liberties. I believe in free speech. I believe in the right to protest. However, these protests that have been happening in front of hospitals recently are dangerous, and they're against the rights of other people to access healthcare. Right? And this is something that I think people need to understand when it comes to the rights to free speech and protest. Living in a society, there are competing rights. So your right to free speech does not trump my right to get medical care, does not trump my right to safety and security of person, right? And yet the People's Party of Canada has been completely linked to these protests, which I do think are problematic. Folks, you can protest. I would defend your right to do so. You can't block a hospital entrance. You can't do that. So PPC supporting these things all along. So when you look at all of this at the end of the day, what's in their platform? Who is part of the party? How many people have resigned due to concerns of racism? How many avowed white supremacists and neo-Nazis have been found in the party? When you look at all that, who does the PPC really benefit? Who are the people of the People's Party of Canada? Well, it's rich people, for sure. They're going to cut your taxes. It's racists, that's for sure. They love the party. They're advocating. Every racist organization in Canada is advocating their members to support the People's Party of Canada. Xenophobes, if you are scared of any other person from outside the country, especially people that aren't white and European, then, People's Party of Canada's got your back. If you're homophobic, if you're opposed to the rights of trans people to be free from discrimination and hate, then People's Party of Canada's got your back. If you deny climate change, if you want to just keep the fossil fuels pumping and keep the greenhouse gas emissions going, you want to keep the Arctic ice shrinking, you want to keep the extreme weather events increasing and intensifying, the People's Party of Canada has your back. So we have to be real about who they actually support. And finally, it's people like this, right-wing conspiracy theorists. If you're a QAnon believer, People's Party of Canada is probably your bag, right? And yet this is a dangerous, dangerous politics that I don't think Canada wants any part of, right? We don't want Trump of the North. We don't want that sort of far-right ideology infecting our political system. So at the end of the day, under a cloak of fake populist rhetoric, what People's Party of Canada policies will actually do is they'll enrich the wealthy. They'll devastate the working class. Again, they'll make homes less affordable. They'll make your rent impossible to afford. There will be no affordable housing. They'll impoverish and make less safe the most vulnerable people in our country, cutting all the social programs, cutting the taxes that support, welfare programs and whatnot. They'll enable hate. They'll embolden racists. They'll force us to abandon our international obligations. They'll isolate us from the global community. They'll increase corporate power over our democracy. And they'll speed us closer to runaway climate change and to full-scale ecological collapse. And finally, I think you can also argue that they will prolong the pandemic and enable the spread of dangerous misinformation. So at the end of the day, this is why I felt it was so important to do a special episode on the People's Party of Canada. And I have to say, I know not every People's Party of Canada supporter would endorse these policies. I know that not every People's Party of Canada member or supporter has probably even read these policy positions or understands the impact they would have. And yet, I hope people, through watching this video, could understand that if these are the policies you want enacted, that you are going to be creating, a hellscape in which the strong dominate the weak, in which there are no protections, there are no safeguards, there is no compassion, there is no community. And we do all that while the world burns around us due to a runaway, unchecked climate catastrophe. I don't think these are the policies most people would want. And I really hope that, again, if we can raise awareness about what's really going on behind this party, if we can pull back the false rhetoric, that maybe we can convince some people to reconsider going down this path. Thanks very much for tuning in, folks. See you on the next episode.